Doctors and nurses, have any of your patients surprised you with their amount or lack of pain tolerance? A friend told me an old boy came in with a large laceration on his arm. Suturing it up took over an hour, but can be quite fun as you can chat to the patients. My friend was engrossed talking to him about his experiences in the Second World War and really enjoyed treating him. The old chap was in good spirits throughout and told him lots of interesting stories about his time behind enemy lines or in trenches in Flanders. After he put the last stitch in, my friend started clearing up and found the local anesthetic bottle unopened. He realized he'd not put any local in at all, and yet the guy didn't once flinch, leave aside complain. When asked why, he didn't say anything. He just said, "Oh, I thought that's how it's supposed to feel." I didn't mind. Lovely chatting to you. Then walked out. Don't make him how they used to point lignocaine edit. Spoke to my friend last night. I totally didn't do this story justice. The laceration was sustained in a machete attack. 2 guys tried to break into the man's house and one slashed at him, but he fought them off long enough until a neighbor started to run over and they scarpered. Such a relevant detail. How could I have forgotten? He had to clean the wound out thoroughly, which is even more painful than suturing. And to those of you pointing out the Flanders inaccuracy, that's purely my incorrect paraphrasing. It was WW2, so ignore the trench comment. I'll refrain from the obvious "I'm a Dr. Jim, not a historian" line. Or perhaps I won't. A doctor here. My intern year in residency, I saw a 17-year-old kid who, when while playing hockey, tried to stop a puck with a gloved hand. It struck his fingertip, injuring the base of his nail, causing a significant deformity. His nail bed needed repair, which requires first removing the nail. That is done by bluntly dissecting reed, separating the nail from the tissue below it. If your stomach didn't turn reading that and imagining it, congratulations, you have no soul. Typically, we use a numbing agent to eliminate sensation to the entire finger using something called a digital block. I put it in. After 10 minutes, he still felt me touching his fingertip. I tried putting some around the nail. He still felt everything. His mother said his father actually had a similar thing. Lidocaine didn't work on him. I offered him a different numbing medicine. We can inject Benadryl in that case, or even knocking him out. He looked at me in the eyes and said, "Doc, just take it off, without anything." Yeah, it's fine. They fix our cuts without numbing medicine, but it's gonna hurt a lot. I have to scrape. I know, so I went at it. He grabbed a towel with his other hand and I went to work. 45 minutes later, the nail was off. He was repaired, and I replaced the nail in its rightful place. The kid didn't even make a noise. TLDR, hockey players are faking badass. My grandma grew up on a farm in Alberta and was unbelievably tough. She once broke her finger by slamming it in a car door and splintered it herself with popsicle sticks and duct tape. Later her appendix burst, but we didn't find out until they took her to the hospital because she passed out at dinner in the retirement home. Said she hadn't wanted to bother anyone by making a fuss. Finally, she was diagnosed with stomach cancer. It spread through her entire digestive system. After she went into hospice, my mom was cleaning out grandma's apartment and found every single prescription bottle of painkillers mom had picked up at the pharmacy for her, unopened in a drawer. Knowing mom would eventually find them, my grandma had written a note saying she preferred to keep her mind clear. She was seriously badass. Edit. Sweet. I tune out to read a cheesy romance novel where the hero is a totally unbelievable and super hot cowboy, and what do you know? I come back to stories about everyone's badass Canadian grandparents. So great. Grandparents are awesome, aren't they? Edit 2. Cut my finger on the lid of a can tonight. Beached about it all night. I'm convinced I'm going to die of septic shock in my sleep. So my grandma, I'm not a doctor or nurse, but this happened to me. I completely shattered my knee and part of my leg after I was running and slipped on some ice into a stone wall. I was with a group of friends and all they saw was me slide and hit the wall. They came over and asked if I was okay. In a normal voice I said I couldn't move my leg. No tears, screaming or anything. No one believed me, but after a minute or two I convinced them to call 911. The whole time I was waiting for ambulance, about 30 minutes, I was talking to them normally and no one believed I was actually hurt until I started going in and out of consciousness. Right as the paramedics got there I started to wake up. They got out and they didn't think anything was wrong until they cut my pants off and saw my femur was almost protruding out of my leg. I had no kneecap and tops of the tibia and fibula were protruding out. They took me to hospital. No drugs in the ambulance, as I was joking around with them, that is asking if I'm allergic to anything I told the apparently stone walls. They got me to hospital and rushed me into where the doctors came over and were shocked I wasn't screaming or crying. Then about an hour after the initial injury the pain finally started and once they started moving the leg about 3 doses of morphine, because one wasn't enough, and one of Demerol I don't remember the next couple days besides bits and pieces. But all the nurses and doctors told me I had one of the highest pain tolerances they have seen. Although I imagine it wasn't really my choice, mostly the brain just shutting it down, because I was in so much shock and had so much trauma. I had a near identical incident when I was a kid. I also had flipped over my bike, no neck injuries, and had landed on my wrist funny. I was in pain, but walked into the house and had my parents look at. I could make a fist, hold light items, and was not crying in pain or anything. They relayed this to my aunt, a nurse, who said that it sounded like a really bad sprain, and just to keep an eye on it. That was on the weekend, so the school week arrives, and I want to say it was Wednesday/Thursday and we were outside for recess playing Red Rover. A kid came and broke through the chain link made up of me and another kid. I heard a pop and immediately afterwards I had a 1 in or so protrusion on my wrist. The teacher freaked out when I showed her and sent me to the nurse. The nurse called my parents and within an hour I was having my bone set and wrapped in a cast point. Turns out when I crashed my bike I had partially / almost entirely fracture my lower arm bone and the Red Rover hit was enough to fully break it clean off. Did not bother me at all. TLDR. Broke my lower arm bone in a biking accident as a kid, but didn't realize it at first, and didn't get it set for 4 to 5 days later because of that. I'm so there with you. I can't take most pain meds. Anything in the opiate family is either going to make me really sick, or do nothing. Morphine? Like I didn't even take it. Percocet and Demerol? Bring on the vomiting. If I go into the ER for pain, even though I tell them that I can't take opiates and only need extra strong ibuprofen or something like that, they still treat me dismissively. Well, then your pain can't be that bad. This was the ER physician's reaction when I came in with meningitis, which was more painful than childbirth. So maddening. I should note that I have now recovered from 3 surgeries without opiates. It hurts, but not as badly as people might think. We've come to think of any pain as bad, but most things are tolerable if you can take that upper edge off. I recovered from sinus surgery with no meds at all because I couldn't take ibuprofen and Tylenol does nothing for me. I lived. Lots of ice packs to the face. Unfortunately, doctors and nurses sometimes freak out about my lack of meds, even with a pain plan. Twice I've woken up on opiates after surgery, despite my insistence that I can't take them, and had to argue to be allowed to stop taking them. Pain is pretty mysterious and scary, even to medical professionals, and I'm a 43-year-old woman, I should note, not a 20-year-old man. Not an ER doc or nurse, but I work side by side with an ER doctor. I saw an 8-year-old boy come in with a compound fracture to his left humerus, upper arm. First thing I noticed was him strolling in, not a tear or grimace on his face, blood pouring down his arm and a bloody rag held down near his elbow. First thing I thought was he probably had a decent laceration to his arm. Pretty tough, but nothing too impressive. I get into the room and see that the rag was removed, and holy shit, that's a bone sticking out of his arm. How the hell is this kid not bawling, and how the hell did he just walk into the ER, barely cradling his arm? Right then I knew this kid was tough. Little did I know that he was about to become Superman. So I'm sitting there admiring this gruesome wound and listening to his backstory. Apparently the kid was out with a friend riding a 4-wheeler when they accidentally drove into a ditch and flipped the vehicle. Kid was thrown and the quad rolled over his arm. This was about 4 miles out in the middle of nowhere over bumpy dirt trails. So of course he just jumps on the quad and rides the 4 miles back to his house with a bone sticking from his arm. Then has his dad just leisurely drives him the 30 minutes into town to the hospital and strolls on in. Best part, when the doctor said that they needed an x-ray of the arm, he just casually asks, "Before you move it, can I get a little pain medication? It sorta hurts." Most badass 8-year-old I have ever seen. When my daughter was 5, she severed her ring finger in a door. I was making lunch for a picnic when she realized her teddy bear was in her room, and you can't have a picnic without a teddy bear. She went upstairs to grab it when I heard a slam and one single blood-curdling scream. Then silence. I ran to see what was the matter and my little daughter was sitting on the floor in front of her door, covered in blood, and staring at something. She looked at me and said, "My finger is off, mama." I wrapped her hand in a towel, picked up her finger, and called 911. In the ambulance, the paramedic was asking her questions about how much pain she was in, and she told him that it's the most hurting thing ever, but she was more sad that she ruined Teddy with her blood. They ended up being able to reattach the finger, but her Teddy was ruined. I tried to wash him, but it didn't came clean. The whole upstairs looked like a murder scene. I even washed blood off the ceiling. A few days later, the paramedic knocked at the door with the biggest teddy bear I ever saw. He gave it to my daughter and told her that she was the bravest little girl in the world. It was really sweet. I don't think my pain tolerance is really any higher than normal, but I've surprised a few people. When I was about 5 years old, I fell and took a pretty good chunk of skin off the side of my head. We went to the emergency room. I was still crying pretty loudly and got into the room. My dad pulled the doctor aside and told him, "Don't surprise him, just tell him exactly what you're going to do, and you'll have the best patient ever." So, the doctor did. He explained that he'd have to shave around the wound, scrub it with a brush to remove any dirt, clean it again, and then bandage it. I said okay, and let him get to work. I sat quietly, wincing occasionally while he scrubbed my open scalp, but didn't cry or freak out. I knew exactly what he was doing, so the pain was completely expected, and I saw no reason to really react. The doctor was absolutely amazed and said he'd try that with all his patients. The 2 other times are more recent. One was a 6.5 out of 2 session with no breaks, after which my artist called me a psycho. The other was when I broke a bone in my hand and told the ear doc that my pain was maybe a 3 or 4 on their scale. Edit. Remembered another one. I split my scalp open on the antenna of an F-18 and needed stitches/staples. It was almost 3 hours before a doctor was finally ready to start stapling me up, and by that time I was sick of waiting while still losing blood. He realized he had forgotten the numbing agent, and I told him, "Doc, look at how many tattoos I have. Do you really think a few staples are going to bother me?" He looked a little horrified for a moment, asked me if I was sure, and then finally stapled me up 10 staples. Not a doctor, but once I was bouncing at a club in a historic part of the downtown district, where my college was located. Being in the historic district, the building had high ceilings and big tall windows with thick, heavy glass. One night some kids got upstairs and decided it would be a good idea to kick one of the windows out, right over top of the crowded smoking patio out front. I felt a great weight come down on the top of my head and heard the sound of breaking glass. I thought, being that it was a pretty rough bar, that someone broke a bottle over my head, so I turned around raising the dukes and ready to fight, when I feel what only could be described as my ear peeling off the side of my head. What had happened was, a shard of glass about an inch wide and over a foot long connected with my head at the topmost point of where my ear connected to my head, slid down through my ear canal and lodged in the back of my jawbone, making it impossible to close my mouth properly. I turned to my boss who was standing next to me, apparently, because I don't remember this next part. This is what bystanders told me, and said, "Hey Mike, would you pull this out for me?" Went to the hospital, got stitch sans numbing aid, and made it back to the bar before close for a beer. TLDR, piece of glass almost cut off my ear and part of the side of my face. Got stitched without numbing agent, went to get a beer after. I was a patient, my appendix burst, and I didn't know that the main diagnostic criteria for appendicitis is pain. Doctor poked me and asked if it hurt. It did, so I calmly answered yes and described the pain as best I could. He told me that if it was appendicitis I would be writhing in pain and send me home. A week or so passes and I got sort of better, but it still hurt. Then everything suddenly got a lot worse, buffing up bits of digestive lining from both ends. Pain at that spot got noticeably worse, etc. So we go to the hospital, where they order x-rays this time. Doctor/x-ray tech looked at my x-rays and got this kind of stunned look and went, surgery? Like right now? Asked when I started getting pain there, and when I said over a week ago there was this moment of, you're not supposed to still be alive/why didn't you go to the doctor sooner? Explained about my lack of reaction to being poked there. Oh. You must have a really high pain tolerance. Wait, do they have you on any painkillers now? No, I'm fine. I was actually in really good spirits because my digestive system hadn't worked for a week and they were giving me fourth nutrients. Anyway, got surgery where they discovered that the reason I'd lasted that long with appendicitis is that it formed an abscess after bursting the first time, sort of temporarily patching itself. And when the abscess burst as well as when things got really bad. All through the recovery they kept offering me painkillers and having to tell them so many times that I didn't want any. Got annoying. I came out of that with a reputation for having a crazy high pain tolerance. But years later, totally unrelated, I managed to stomp on a piece of glass, and when they put stitches in they managed to run one through a nerve or something. Had stitches before, was never a problem. When they took it out later, I doubled over screaming, completely involuntarily. Weird experience, hearing yourself scream, and taking a moment to process that you'd made that sound and there wasn't a thing you could do about it. So I'm not able to control all pain. Sorry I'm late to the party. I have so many. Working at a level 1 trauma center is awesome. We had a guy get his arm ripped off by some sort of tractor. He then drove this tractor to an EMS bay and asked them if he could get a ride to the hospital or if they could take him back to his car since his tractor is too slow. Also had a guy fall down a ravine and fracture his tib/fib. He crawled up to his truck, used his shotgun to push on the pedal, and drove himself to the hospital. Had a girl fall on her steak knife during dinner. Came in 24 hours later because her cut wasn't any better and she was afraid she'd need stitches. It was 6+ inches deep into her abdomen. She went straight to the OR. I think there's been probably 5 or 6 people I've seen who come in with MES, heart attacks, and they're totally chill before any meds. I've learned the longer the problem list, the less they're able to rate their pain, because even getting in 4th is 20/10. Which, by the way, the scale only goes to 10 point, so I made up a scale of my own. Since people can't seem to understand point 10/10, you are actively being mauled and ripped apart by a bear. 09/10, you weren't wearing a seatbelt and have been in a rollover accident at high speeds and have multiple broken bones. Being shot through the abdomen or stabbed once. 08/10, giving birth without medications or an epidural. For men, ureterolithiasis, kidney stones not in the kidney anymore, akin to swallowing attack. 07/10, heart attacks, ischemic bowel, blocked blood vessels, essentially. 06/10, appendicitis, charlodochilithiasis, small bowel obstruction, intussusception, abscess to the genitals. 05/10, this is where most people experience pain, at worst. I didn't bother going below this. Fibromyalgia is around here. Edit. Thought of one more. My least favorite case was one who passed away. Guy's car exploded on him in an accident and his car was engulfed in flames for over an hour and everyone thought he was dead. He was alive and conscious and only rated his pain as 0.9, despite having basically 90% burns throughout his body. Shortly after he decompensated, was placed on a ventilator and terminally extubated the next day. Not the doctor or nurse, but when I was about 3 or 4 years old I came down with something bad. My mother is a narcissist, politely put, a rather selfish emotional woman child. I was neglected for I don't know how long. One time, I remember feeling sick and not eating or drinking. I eventually became so weak that I couldn't walk. Ma saw I wasn't responding to her and gave me a grape ice pop to try getting me to talk to her. I puked it up. Still wasn't responsive. She got pissed about how withdrawn I was being and yelled at me. Got close enough in my face to feel the heat coming off my forehead, so went and took my temperature. I looked like hell at this point. Raccoon eye circles, dry lips, pale/bluish skin. She freaked out when the temperature came back as 105 and took me to a clinic where they sent me to the ER and huked me up to and forth to rehydrate me and made me stay in a hospital bed for a while. I had pneumonia and severe dehydration. I never complained or thought I was bad off. I sat blank-faced and limp for the whole ordeal. My veins were so tiny the nurses stuck me a bunch of times and dug around to get it right point. The outcome was horrible. To this day grapes make me sick. I can go without eating or drinking to the point of starvation and severe dehydration unless I remind myself, and I had an incapacitating phobia of needles and veins. Another time I didn't go to the ER but was mauled by a horse that wasn't mine. The horse managed to pick me up with his teeth and threw me. I was rattled and dizzy but didn't really worry or feel pain. My left side was briefly paralyzed. I calmly got up off the ground and unlocked the gate to get out of the horse's stall, closed it behind me, just feeling nauseous and pissed that my left hand wasn't working. I called my mother so she could drive up and get me, as I had walked about a mile off to take care of this horse. She instead raged about how I had gotten myself hurt, demanded I walked back this instant, and hung up. So I made the walk back over the fields and through more gates. Didn't know how bloody and dirty I was. Once home, I realized my shoulder was bitten up and reluctantly let my mother see it. I told her my hand wasn't really functioning. She insisted I take a shower. Now, once there, the arm started to ache a bit and feel uncomfortable. When finally at the clinic, x-rays came back and revealed that I had broken both my ulnar and radius. Clean across, as in, about an inch of the ends were free. The only thing holding my wrist sort of in place was that the ends were shoved at an angle that made my wrist dip down. They put on the splint wrong and referred me to a specialist the next day, since, hey, I didn't feel too bad. Haha. I was really sick the whole night, puking. I went to the hospital and the pain finally set in when they had to re-break my arm and set it in the opposite angle to make it heal correctly. Weird cast. I had my hand in some kind of swoop claw position for 3 months. Apparently I should've gone to the ER the first day. Not a doctor or nurse, but my wife just demolished her ankle last Sunday. I mean demolished. We were helping her brother move. I was at his new apartment with him offloading the U-Haul. My wife was at the old apartment grabbing the last of the miscellaneous crap to put in her dad's truck. She was walking down the stairs and missed the last step while carrying a small empty ice chest. She rolled her ankle and destroyed it. I got the emergency room and realized it was bad when different nurses kept coming in to look at it. But it didn't look that bad. Anyway, she had surgery early the next morning, 4 hours, 3 braces, and 14 screws later her ankle is fixed. The first 3 days in the hospital were hell. My wife has a ridiculously low tolerance for pain, so we were expecting the worst. I warned the nurses and they were really good about trying their best to keep her comfortable. But keeping her comfortable seemed impossible. She was in constant pain. I don't mean just moaning and groaning. We are talking damn near hyperventilating, crying, and yelling. Other patients were hitting their nurse buttons and telling them to help. That poor girl screaming. None of the pain medication seemed to work. We thought it was due to her low tolerance for pain. No, it was because her body could handle a ridiculous amount of pain medication. Her surgeon came by to see her on day 2, and we told him about the constant pain. He said the anesthesiologist had to use a sheet load of gas to get her to sleep. So when the nurses heard that, they started hitting her with enough medication to enrage the giant at ease. Finally she was comfortable. But poor girl has no tolerance for pain, yet her body requires a ridiculous amount of pain meds to numb the pain. A nurse here. While it's a fairly typical day to have people come in complaining of 10/10ths whilst holding a big gulp, this is much less common. However, one day an older farmer came in with his wife. He was mid-70s, with white wispy hair, heavy-duty overalls, and boots caked with mud. He was reaching for something on a ladder fell, and cut his arm really bad. Like through the tissue. But not only that, but he dislocated his shoulder. Damned old age. He was real salty about having his wife force him to come in, and when I walked in the room you would have thought he'd been playing bingo, were it not for the ghastly bloody rags holding his arm together. First thing he says is, "How long is this gonna take? It's still light outside." Cue Wi-Fi roll. Long story short, through cleaning the wound, stitching him up, and putting his shoulder back in, imagine two grown men pulling out and up on your bad arm, while a third pulls you the opposite way. He denied all pain meds, because then I'll have to admit my wife was right about bringing me here, and I'd be wrong about being able to do all this at home with some towels and duct tape. Being a male nurse can be sometimes emasculating, but this guy absolutely wrecked me, as I stood there in my bright blue scrubs. Not a doctor, but I saw one of my friend handled his wound when we was in high school. After a soccer match, it was rained hard, so we went back home. The rain flood ankle deep and the street looked like river. There were lots of manhole and construct on the way, and my friend fall in one. It was small and full of metal bars. His right leg was stuck. We couldn't see anything because of water. There was no one around for help, and it's rained harder and harder. After 20 minutes trying to get my friend's leg out, we realized that at least 3 or 4 construction steel bars was thrust deep into his leg. My friend freaked out and started to lose patience. He decided to pull out his leg, didn't give a shit about the wound. We counted 1, 2, 3, and he pulled it out. The moment I saw the leg, I told him not to look at it. Besides several small cuts, there was one big hole below his right knee. It cut so deep I can see his bone, yes his bone, and it bleed like a fountain. The scariest part was that flesh from the cut still stick with his leg by a small piece of skin. That red piece of meat, with the size of a small banana, swayed like a pendulum the moment my friend started to stand up. He saw it, and tried to fit it back into his wound. I was scared shitless, and told him we should go to the hospital. I carried him to a nearby clinic, and a doctor sewed the flesh back. He didn't say a thing, called her mom to pick him up. Weeks later I asked him how did he feel at that moment. He said he too scared, couldn't feel anything, until he arrived home. His leg healed fast. Now it has a scar big as a banana on it. P/S. Sorry for my English. I'm from C. Worked as a firefighter/EMT for 3 years. Went through paramedic school and was in the process of getting signed off when I left, for multiple reasons. I've seen both ends of the spectrum. People that looked tough break down, and the weak looking ones not say a word. One of the most memorable was while doing a rotation in the air for medic school. I'm in Central Florida's level 1 trauma center. Locals know where I'm talking about when they fly in a guy with multiple lacerations to his fingers. Sounds innocent enough. Turns out he was cutting wood. When the blade kicked a piece into his face, he reacted by reaching out, unfortunately into the blade. I watched the neuro exam, where he couldn't feel anything in the affected fingers. He rejected all pain medicine, and refused to look at the wounds, claiming it was his stupidity that caused it all. It's one thing to have irreversible damage to something you use on a daily basis. It's another to beat yourself up over it. I felt for the guy, but punishing yourself in a situation like that isn't healthy. Another was a call I was on while on duty. Motorcycle vs SUV. Arrived on scene to find the motorcycle rider was missing his foot a couple feet. Goddammit, no pun intended, away. Completely unresponsive. We log roll, expose, incontinent, become semi-responsive part way through the call. He looks at my medic and asks if his leg is okay, because it feels funny. While his foot is sitting in the bag I placed it in next to him on the stretcher. They flew him out. He survived and apparently ran into another medic of mine that was on scene in the grocery store. On the other end of the spectrum, you have grown-as men crying because they've had body aches for 3 weeks. If it's one thing I learned in those 3 years was not to judge what is going on with a person. Pain is a subjective thing influenced by several factors. Doctors can be so uncaring. There's only one smaller here. I have chronic conditions, a ton of them. One of them is so my stomach is semi-paralyzed. It's called gastroparesis. There are pain attacks associated with it. They are horrible. I mean, think of passing a stone or giving birth, or they feel like that all put together. They can last hours. I know that there isn't much to be done about them, so I usually treat at home with the pills that I have. I have enough opioids to kill many. My doctor knows I'm very responsible and undertake my meds way too often. It's all in my chart at the year 2 point. For the first time being here in 2 years, I had to have an ambulance called 2 or so weeks ago. That pain attack was the worst I ever had. It was also different as the pain went from a nerve all the way up to my neck. That never happens. Well, I get there, they make me wait forever, and I have to fight with the doctor, and 3 hours later, when my pain is actually gone, I get a shot of Toradol. I now know better than to ever go back to this. It's written in the instructions what to give me if this happens. 4th Dilaudid, maximum dose and something for the nausea like Zofran. Nope, she watched me suffer and cry and scream for 2 hours. I mean, at one point I was looking for objects to kill myself with, that's how bad it was. The doctor wouldn't have cared less. Can't hand out too many opioids. Let's let the patient suffer. First time in 2 years in that for pain. If I wanted to get high, I have all the meds and more at home. Not a doc or nurse, but I was an EMT in paramedic school, doing some shifts in the ER. We had an 18-year-old girl come in with a sore throat because the Walgreens clinic line was too long. Yep, she came to the ER in the middle of the afternoon on a weekday for a sore throat. Wish I could have been there when her dad got that bill. Well, I went to start fourth access on her using a little 18 gauge. She shrieked and screamed loud enough to hear across the entire ER. And it wasn't because I'm bad at fourths. She was just a whiny little girl. On the other end of the pain spectrum, we had a guy come in by ambulance one Tuesday morning. He had decided to start his week off with some beer and whiskey at 9 or 10 AM on Monday, and then proceeded to drink for 30 plus hours without sleeping. He got in a fight with his drinking buddies over something, got knifed, and kicked out of the house. The ambulance found him sitting on the curb, smoking a cigarette and drinking a beer. He had no shirt or shoes. He also had multiple lacerations across his chest, stomach and back. Most were 18 plus inches in length and over 0.5 inches deep, bleeding like a stuck pig. Calm and courteous, the EMT told me the only thing he wanted was a couple minutes to have a last smoke before they loaded him on the ambulance. As he was obviously in a fight, the police showed up to take his statement. The officer told me that this happened to the guy a few times a year, only the last time he had been shot instead of knifed. Didn't want pain meds, didn't curse or cry, just sat there on the bed politely. Late to the party, but I'll throw this in the mix. I'm not a doctor, but I had a situation that should go in this thread. My sister used to shoot meth, still does, but used to too, and I would do it with her as well. She had the needle in her vein and injected the whole shot, which was a decent size, probably around 50 units. Pulled the needle out and, well, there was no needle. It was broken off in her vein. Hospital was out of the question at first, but we knew we had to get that needle out of there before it got sucked into her bloodstream and into her heart. She, my sister, was high as hell, but knew the situation could get serious. She grabbed a razor blade and slit her elbow open and started digging with tweezers and fingers trying to find this needle. We were all high too, so we started helping. After about 30 minutes of digging and no luck, I got scared and told her I'm getting help. She was still very high but agreed. I called my grandfather and he took her to the hospital to have the needle removed. Throughout the 30 minutes or so digging, she never flinched and watched the whole thing. She was the main one participating. I'm sure it was the dope numbing it, but watching it was only bearable while I was high. Her thumb and pointer finger would dug into her elbow feeling around searching for this needle. I'll never forget that sight. Point now for the questions that may come after you read this. After a hab, she never stopped shooting dope. Still does to this day. I met a girl who I fell in love with who gave me a choice between her and dope, and I'm a family man now with a good job and regretful past. I know I'm late, but I really hope people see this. I'm a long time lurker, and I made this account specifically so that I could share this story. When I was still a med student, I was training in the emergency room at the hospital near my campus one night when a girl came in at around 9 PM stating that she had a cut on her leg she thought might need a couple stitches. This girl was all smiles and very calm. She was probably about 15, very polite, and was walking completely normal, so I figured she might be exaggerating the seriousness of the injury a bit. She stated that she had accidentally cut her leg a day ago, but didn't want to come in as she didn't think stitches were necessary at the time. Then she was at soccer practice and got cleated quite hard where the cut was and it split back open. Her parents were away, so she got her friend's dad to drop her off at eMERG. I asked her if I could take a look and she replied with a cheery sure. She rolls up her pant leg, slides down her sock, and on the side of her calf was a 4 or 5 inch V-shaped cut that went right down to the bone. So I gave her an anesthetic and began stitching her up, and I told her she might not want to look. She said it was fine and that she was curious anyways and sat there watching me stitch it the entire time. Then she hopped up, rolled her pant leg down, thanked me, and then called her mom's friend for a ride home. That was, to this day, the ballsiest teenage girl I've ever seen.